Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2 and the 11th mission of the US Marine campaign. After blasting through the Syrian ambush at the Kutayf Gorge, Marine and Army forces have a clear run into Damascus itself. What Syrian forces remain to defend the capital have pulled deep into the urban to try and minimise the effectiveness of overwhelming coalition firepower. The MEU commander intends to seize a foothold in the city, setting up a forward operating base at Abbasin Square. Adjacent to the square and its hub of road connections is the Abbasin Stadium, which provides a significant area of enclosed open space that can be used as a logistic node to support further operations. Of course, the Syrians are prepared to defend it. The area around the square is made up of several dense urban polygons, separated by significant roads. The Marines are approaching from the bottom left of the map, with Fares al-Khoury Street on their right running up to the square, where it meets Mohammed Anwar Kemal Street coming in from the left map edge. The space between forms a triangle pointing towards the square that I'm designating the school block, after a large building in the middle which is apparently the Zayd bin Khattab School. Across al-Khoury Street to the Marines' right is another triangular block aimed at the square, this one dominated by the Hamaza and Al-Abbas Mosque, so we're calling it the Mosque Block. On the other side of that is Al-Hamadani Street, which runs straight up the right edge to the square and continues beyond as An-Nasira Street. Left of this is the stadium. This is obviously a large hollow building, but the interior has no access for vehicles and its exterior has limited firing points. Left of the stadium is some more open ground with a few compounds, then another road which arcs around the back of the stadium from Camel Street onto An-Nasira. The main roads are mostly lined with multi-storey buildings, many of them with balconies and plenty of windows. In terms of objectives, the square and the stadium need to be occupied for 250 points each, and there are 200 points available for causing up to 70% enemy casualties, with another 100 for keeping more than half the US force alive. In addition, we have some preserve objectives. We need to avoid damaging unspecified residential buildings for 100 points, and the mosque for another 100. The Marines are attacking at 1900, but although it's dusk and the light is failing, the briefing suggests that it's not yet dark enough for night vision. While night vision is a significant enabler for coalition forces, and I would prefer to attack at night to leverage that, some elements of the enemy force anticipated by the briefing do share this capability. There is apparently a Syrian Special Forces company defending the square, bolstered by modern anti-tank weapons and a platoon of T-90 tanks. All of these elements have night vision or even thermal capability. Tackling the defence are the leading elements of the MEU. Two platoons from Fox Company, plus the Company HQ teams, are starting out on map, to be followed after 5 minutes by 3rd Tank Platoon, and later by some of the Army's 114 elements, a Striker Infantry platoon around the 50-minute mark, and a Striker MGS section slightly afterwards. Off-map support is limited by the requirement to minimise collateral damage. Fox Company's organic 60mm mortars and one of the MEU's 81mm platoons begin the mission on call, bolstered after around 50 minutes by a section of Army 120mm mortars. There are 70 minutes on the clock and not a lot of ground to cover. The map is only about 400 by 550 meters, so I should be able to take my time with this one. The streets are obvious fire lanes for the defence that I don't want to deal with if I don't have to, and likewise the open ground of the square itself makes a good kill zone. In particular, the Syrians could deny it from difficult to deal with positions up An-Nasira Street next to the stadium, so I'm inclined to punch left and secure the stadium before moving on to the square. Whatever I decide to do, I'm first going to need to occupy the school block, get an idea of what I'm dealing with, and see if I can open a vehicle route through the block so I can avoid going down Al-Khoury Street on the right. That, however, is a slightly lesser concern than sorting out the Marines' initial situation. 2 Marine rifle platoons is a lot of Marines, and they're packed into a relatively small area of the map with limited cover. So I start by spreading out into the nearby buildings, particularly getting the snipers and MG teams in positions where they can cover the interior of the school block. The Syrians are already dropping what looks like air-bursting mortars on the edge of Al-Khoury Street, so I'm a bit limited in how far forward I can go, but even from turn 1 I have things to do. One of the sniper teams spots a T-90 posted on the back left corner of the stadium. This isn't fantastically positioned, but it does cover the left, and there's no way I'm going to pass up a chance to schwack an enemy tank so early in the battle. Fox Company's Javelin team joins the snipers, gets line of sight, and does its thing. Despite the threat of the enemy artillery, I really need to move forward. I have several whole squads of Marines hanging around in the open where a lucky flyer could cause me a disaster, but I don't really have the space to disperse yet. Luckily, there doesn't seem to be any resistance in the school, a fact confirmed by a scout team checking it out, so I can start squeezing my lead platoon forward. Meanwhile, a series of contact icons pop up around the square. These must be sound contacts because I can't see over there yet and confirm exactly what's there, but it looks like a tank contact moving down into the square from An Nasira, and a swarm of lighter vehicles moving right to left along Camel Street. These quickly resolve into armed pickups, unconned technicals, which are rapidly engaged by my base of fire behind the school. While the unconned combatant crews get a short terminal lesson about the vulnerability of civilian vehicles on the modern battlefield, more contacts pop up. Spotting the Marines' muzzle flashes in the gathering gloom, a Syrian Special Forces squad opens fire from one of the compounds left of the stadium, and an AT-14 team on a tower block balcony further back gets a missile away. This misses, but as the firefight starts to get going, another one on a rooftop further left nails one of my base of fire buildings. 2 of the 3 men in one of the sniper teams are wounded, and the machine gun I have firing from that building is temporarily suppressed. This is a bit of a problem. I can't see over the high walls in the school block from the ground, and before I can expand my perimeter to include more, there are only 3 buildings I can take advantage of to get some elevation and see over the left. Unfortunately, buildings are pretty big targets for something like an ATGM, and the 2 Syrian AT-14 teams are about 500 meters away, slightly too far to consistently suppress. Although I'm clearing the school, which will not only provide more elevated positions itself, but unlock access to more buildings on the left, this is taking some time. Getting more bodies forward could be risky as well. The enemy mortars are still falling on my immediate right, reducing me to sending Marines forward near my base of fire buildings, where an ATGM hit could easily cause casualties. What I really need is some more firepower. This arrives in the form of 3rd Platoon's Abrams, but I haven't blasted an Abrams-sized gap in the wall in front of the school that they can use to advance yet. That leaves them with precious little room to manoeuvre on their first turn, and the platoon HQ gets spotted by a 3rd AT-14 team atop a tower block on the far right. The Syrians score a hit, and the platoon HQ reacts by instantly nailing them in return, but although the missile didn't penetrate, it has immobilised it. There's not a lot the platoon HQ can see from that position, it literally hasn't moved since it arrived, and with only 3 tanks showing up, I'm effectively already down to 2. This is a problem compounded by my lead Marine's small team using its last demo charge to blow a second small hole in the wall I need breached, instead of making one big one, meaning that I'll either have to bring up the trail platoon's teams and hope they do a better job, or risk friendly fire casualties amongst nearby Marines by using the Abrams 120mm gun to get the job done instead. Even more annoyingly, not only are the AT-14s proving to be a pain, but the Syrian SF squad on the left is equipped with an RPG-29 and its gunner has gotten his eye in, repeatedly putting HE rockets into one of my base of fire buildings. It is, however, not all bad news. The balcony AT-14 team has been knocked out by machine gun fire, and although the Abrams can't fit through the blasted gaps in the wall, they can absolutely shoot through them. So up goes the first Abrams for a little shoot and scoot. With a 15-second target briefly command, it'll be able to get 2 main gun rounds off before reversing back into cover. The first round hits a tree. As the commander hoses the AT-14 rooftop with 50 caliber fire, the Syrians get a missile off. This strikes the section of wall between the 2 breaches, not only failing to impact the Abrams, but sorting out the gap problem. The Abrams sends a 120mm heat shell back and takes out the AT-14. With 3 AT-14s now out of the picture, it's reasonable to assume that there is a 4th one out there somewhere, but having evidently not strayed into its field of fire yet, I've got plenty of leeway to get stuck in with the tanks. Moving forward to occupy the school building is a bit of a pain thanks to renewed enemy mortar fire, but reveals another Syrian Special Forces squad in the stadium, then more on the far right of An-Nasirah Street, firing across the top of the square. More concerning, however, is the confirmed presence of the other T-90. This is pretty much right underneath the buildings at the tip of the school block, ready to blindside anyone rushing up Al-Khoury Street, and I've managed to get eyes on it from another building off on the left. The team that spotted it takes some time to engage Syrian SF, giving their position away to the T-90, which hits them with a 125mm round. It's not until a few turns later that I can bring up a Javelin team to take it out. This comes from an Army M240 team. The reinforcing strikers have turned up. Unfortunately, they've only turned up with 2 vehicles and a single rifle squad, so I've elected to use them as my anti-tank reserve by doling out the Javelins carried in their vehicles. The Marines exchange fire with the Syrian Special Forces, somewhat ineffectually thanks to a combination of range and cover, but I am able to slowly pick targets off using the 2 Abrams. In the meantime, I start moving a squad up the right side of the school block, along Al-Khoury Street, as a prelude to occupying the buildings right at the apex that will allow me to dominate the square. But the Marine teams I send forward are greeted with a hail of small arms fire. There's a swarm of uncons set up in a large building at the top of the mosque block. The lead Marines quickly take casualties and become pinned, but I have plenty of firepower on hand now. As well as the Marine rifle squads back in the school building, I have one of the Striker infantry carriers on hand and 2 newly arrived Striker MGSs. With the uncons fighting from exposed balconies, they're easy targets and quickly put down. By the time I've moved up to the end of the school block, all the existing targets have been serviced and things are pretty quiet. I've decided not to bother making a wide left hook into the stadium. The first Syrian FS squad spotted in one of the compounds over there proved to be a massive pain to deal with, and even after they were destroyed, there was another squad waiting in the compound behind. Having apparently won the firefight and destroyed or driven off all the enemy that has contested my occupation of the school block, it seems easier to just run across Camel Street and get stuck into the stadium directly. Swinging one of the Abrams onto Camel Street elicits no response. Neither does advancing it down the road towards the square until it can nestle up with a tall wall between it and the stadium, watched over by Marines in the buildings opposite. So I get the tank to pop smoke, then run the Striker rifle squad past it and straight up to one of the doors into the stadium. Again, no response. The stadium looks like a terrible place for a firefight, far too exposed, but there doesn't seem to be any more Syrian Special Forces or uncons waiting for the Marines there. With a foothold secure, I start my trailing Marine platoon up to the tip of the school block, then across the edge of the square and into the stadium, fanning out through the stands. Still, no resistance. With the square evidently secure, the stadium at least contested and the enemy having been hammered, I take a chance and go for a speculative ceasefire rather than laboriously sweeping the stadium. The result is a tactical victory for the Marines. The company HQ of the Syrian Special Forces is hidden away in the stadium, denying that objective, but I've gotten enough victory points to claim a win. Overall, the Marines took 23 casualties, mostly in the initial contact from the AT-14s and RPG-29s. The vehicles are all intact. Though the Abrams Platoon HQ and one of the Striker MGSs have been immobilised, the first by an AT-14 and the second by a mortar bomb. The Syrians have gotten comprehensively pasted, with 112 casualties to go along with the loss of 2 T-90 SAs and a handful of technicals. This battle certainly felt like a slog, mainly because it was difficult to get to grips with the enemy. Although I had a lot of Marines, they were separated from their targets by the wide open streets I didn't want to cross. This meant that while I was able to relatively consistently suppress Syrian Special Forces squads, I wasn't able to close with and destroy them. That role fell to my HE chuckers, the Abrams and the MGS Strikers, which were at times difficult to get into position and were running low on ammunition by the end. But we're done. The Marines have secured themselves a foothold in the Syrian capital. With the coalition closing in from the north and east, the main concern is now dealing with the Syrian forces trying to flee west towards Lebanon. So in the next and final mission, the Marines will be flying in to block their escape. Hope you all enjoyed this video and found it interesting. If you'd like to see these videos early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.